Linda Morrison sat in front of her computer screen at the observatory in Hawaii. She had been watching the stars for 15 years, but she had never seen anything like this before. The numbers on her screen made no sense. Something big was moving through space, and it was coming toward Earth. She checked her equipment 3 times. Everything was working fine. The readings were real. Linda picked up her phone and called her supervisor. Her hands were shaking as she dialed the number. When he answered, she could barely speak. There were objects in space, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They were moving faster than anything humans had ever built. Within 2 hours, every space agency in the world confirmed what Linda had found. The objects were ships, alien ships. They were arranged in perfect formations, moving together like a school of fish. The metal on their hulls reflected light in strange ways. Scientists tried to figure out what material could do that, but nobody had an answer. President Helen Clark sat in the White House Situation Room. The room was full of military officers and scientists. Everyone looked worried. Admiral Peter Hughes stood at the front of the room with a laser pointer. He showed everyone a map of the solar system. The red dots representing the alien ships were getting closer to Earth. They would arrive in 3 days. The president asked if anyone had tried to talk to the aliens. A young communications officer named Amy Rodriguez stood up. She explained that her team had sent every kind of message they could think of. Radio signals, laser pulses, mathematical formulas, even music. The aliens had ignored everything. They just kept coming. Dr. Nathan Cross ran his hands through his gray hair. He had spent his whole life hoping to find proof of alien life. Now that it was here, he wished it wasn't. The energy readings from the alien ships were massive. Each ship carried enough power to destroy a city. The lead ships in the formation had even bigger weapons. Nathan did the math in his head. If the aliens wanted to destroy Earth, they could do it in less than a day. Captain Lisa Morgan was in charge of Earth's space defense. She looked at the list of weapons humanity had available. A few missile platforms in orbit, some old satellites with laser systems, a handful of experimental weapons that might not even work. It was like bringing a knife to a gunfight. Actually, it was worse than that. It was like bringing a toothpick to a tank battle. At military bases around the world, soldiers prepared for war. Sergeant Jake Palmer stood in formation with his unit at Fort Carson in Colorado. The base commander had given them a speech about defending humanity. Jake looked at the young soldiers around him. Most of them were just kids. They had joined the military to pay for college or see the world. Now they might have to fight aliens. Jake didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In cities everywhere, people were scared. The news showed the same images over and over. Computer simulations of the alien fleet. Experts arguing about what the aliens wanted. Religious leaders praying for peace. Store shelves emptied as people bought food and water. Gas stations ran out of fuel as families tried to leave the cities. Kevin Torres sat at the news desk trying to keep his voice calm. He had been a news anchor for 20 years. He had reported on wars, natural disasters, and terrorist attacks. But this was different. This was the end of the world, maybe. He told people not to panic, but he could see the fear in his cameraman's eyes. Everyone was terrified. The Henderson family lived in a suburb outside Chicago. Dan Henderson filled the bathtub with water while his wife Julie packed their important documents. Their 2 kids sat on the couch watching cartoons. They were too young to understand what was happening. Dan envied them. He wished he could go back to being a kid when the biggest problem was finishing homework. In orbit above Earth, Commander Ryan Mitchell floated in the International Space Station. He and his crew had the best view of the approaching alien fleet. Through the window, he could see tiny points of light moving against the stars. Soon those points would become huge ships. Ryan recorded a message for his family. He tried to sound brave, but his voice cracked when he talked about his daughter. She was only 5 years old. He wondered if he would ever see her again. Dr. Emma Blake worked in her lab at the Centers for Disease Control. Everyone else was worried about alien weapons. Emma was worried about alien diseases. What if the aliens carried viruses that could kill humans? What if breathing the same air as them was deadly? She had prepared as many vaccines and treatments as she could, but it probably wouldn't be enough. Then something strange happened. On the 3rd day, when the alien ship should have reached Earth, they changed direction. Dr. Vincent Hayes was the first to notice. He was tracking the fleet's trajectory when the numbers shifted. The ships were no longer heading straight for Earth. They were angling toward Mars. Everyone in the Situation Room started talking at once. President Clark raised her hand for silence. She asked what it meant. Were the aliens going to Mars first? Was it a trick? Would they set up a base there before attacking Earth? Colonel Greg Foster was put in charge of watching Mars. Every telescope, every satellite, every piece of equipment that could see the red planet was aimed at it now. The alien fleet slowed as it approached Mars. Then it stopped. The ships arranged themselves in a circular pattern around the planet. They just sat there, not moving, not attacking, not doing anything. Linda Morrison watched her screen in confusion. The aliens had crossed light years of space to get here. They had the power to destroy worlds, and now they were just hovering near Mars like they were waiting for something. She didn't understand. Nobody understood. The aliens had come to conquer Earth, everyone was sure of it. So why had they stopped before reaching Mars? What were they waiting for? The world held its breath and watched. 3 days of terror had become an even worse kind of fear. The fear of not knowing. The fear of waiting. The fear that something terrible was about to happen but not knowing what or when. Humanity had prepared for invasion. They had prepared for war. They had even prepared for extinction. But nobody had prepared for this. Colonel Greg Foster barely slept anymore. He had set up a command center dedicated to watching Mars. Dozens of screens showed different views of the alien fleet. The ships floated in perfect formation around the red planet. They had been there for 6 days now. 6 days of just waiting and watching. Every few hours, the alien ships would move slightly. They seemed to be scanning the surface of Mars. Their movements were slow and careful, like someone examining an old painting in a museum. Greg didn't understand it. These were warships. At least they looked like warships. So why were they acting like research vessels? Dr. Emma Blake had a theory. She presented it to the command team on the morning of the 7th day. Maybe the aliens were looking for something on Mars. She pulled up old photos of the Martian surface on the big screen. Scientists had always wondered if life had existed on Mars billions of years ago. What if the aliens knew something humans didn't? What if they were searching for ancient ruins or artifacts? Dr. Vincent Hayes shook his head. He thought Emma was wrong. The aliens had traveled across the stars. They wouldn't come all this way for archaeology. They came for resources. Earth had water, oxygen, and millions of species. Mars was a dead rock. It made no sense for them to focus on Mars when Earth was right there, full of everything they could need. The two scientists argued for an hour. Colonel Foster listened to both of them. He didn't know who was right. Maybe neither of them. The truth was that humans had no idea what aliens wanted or how they thought. Trying to guess was like trying to understand what an ant was thinking. The aliens were just too different. Amy Rodriguez sat in her small office surrounded by computers. She had been trying to decode alien signals for a week. The aliens weren't completely silent. They sent out regular pulses of energy. Amy had recorded all of them. She played them over and over, looking for patterns, numbers, music, language, anything that made sense. On the 8th day, she found something. It was late at night. Everyone else had gone home. Amy was drinking her 5th cup of coffee when she saw it. The signal repeated every 12 hours. Inside the signal was a mathematical sequence, and inside that sequence were coordinates. Specific coordinates on Mars. She ran to find Colonel Foster. He was asleep in his office, his head on his desk. Amy shook him awake. She showed him what she had found. The coordinates pointed to Olympus Mons, the biggest volcano in the solar system. Greg immediately sent orders to focus every camera on that location. Commander Ryan Mitchell watched from the space station. He had a clear view of both Mars and the alien fleet. His crew took turns at the window, staring at the ships. They looked so peaceful from a distance. Just silver dots hanging in space. It was hard to believe they could be dangerous. Ryan recorded his daily log. He talked about what his crew ate for breakfast. He described the sunrise over Earth. He tried to make everything sound normal, but his hands shook when he held the camera. Everyone on the station knew they might die soon. If the aliens attacked Earth, the space station would probably be destroyed first. They were stuck up here with nowhere to run. On Earth, life had become strange. People still went to work. Kids still went to school. But everyone was distracted. They checked their phones constantly for news. Conversation stopped mid-sentence when someone heard an update. The world was holding its breath. General Diane Foster worked 20-hour days. She was in charge of evacuation plans. If the aliens attacked, millions of people would need to move away from the coasts. The coasts were where most humans lived, and they would be hit first. But moving millions of people was nearly impossible. Where would they go? How would they eat? Diane had nightmares about traffic jams stretching for hundreds of miles, while alien ships destroyed cities. Major Kyle Stevens coordinated with local police and the National Guard. They were setting up emergency shelters inland. Old warehouses, school gymnasiums, and shopping malls were being converted into refugee centers. Kyle tried not to think about how few centers they had compared to how many people would need them. Laura Bennett worked for military intelligence. She spent her days reading reports from every country that was watching the aliens. The Chinese had 3 satellites focused on Mars. The Russians had 2. The Europeans had their Mars rover taking pictures. India had a probe in orbit. Everyone was sharing information now. Old enemies were working together because they had a bigger enemy to worry about. Laura noticed something strange in the reports. The alien ships never came closer than a certain distance from Mars. They stayed in a perfect circle around the planet. It was like there was an invisible line they wouldn't cross. She marked this in her report with a red flag. It seemed important, but she didn't know why. Dr. Nathan Cross was exhausted. He had been working non-stop since the aliens arrived. His team had analyzed thousands of data points. Energy signatures, ship movements, scanning patterns, everything. Nathan had filled 3 notebooks with calculations, but he still didn't understand what the aliens wanted. On the 9th day, Nathan sat in his office staring at his notes. Something was bothering him. The alien ships were powerful. They could have destroyed Mars if they wanted to. They could have come to Earth already, but they hadn't. They were taking their time, being careful, almost respectful. He thought about Emma's archaeology theory again. Maybe she was right. Maybe the aliens were scientists, not soldiers. Maybe they came to study, not to conquer. It was a nice thought. Nathan wanted to believe it, but he had seen the weapons on those ships. Scientists didn't need weapons like that. Captain Lisa Morgan reviewed the latest defense plans. Earth now had exactly 47 functional weapons in orbit. 47 weapons against thousands of alien ships. The math was depressing. Lisa had been a soldier for 15 years. She had fought in 3 wars. She knew when a fight was hopeless. This fight was beyond hopeless, but Lisa kept planning anyway. That was her job. If the aliens came, she would fire every weapon Earth had. It probably wouldn't stop them. It might not even slow them down. But humanity would go down fighting. Lisa found some comfort in that. The 9th day ended like the previous 8. The alien ships continued their slow survey of Mars. They ignored all attempts at communication. They showed no signs of leaving or attacking. The waiting continued. For some people, the waiting was worse than an attack would have been. At least in battle, you knew what was happening. This endless uncertainty was torture. Children asked their parents when the aliens would leave. Parents had no answers. Teachers tried to keep students focused on lessons, but everyone kept looking out the windows at the sky. Religious buildings were full of people praying. Some prayed for peace. Others prayed for a quick end. A few prayed for the aliens to just do something, anything, to end the terrible waiting. Dr. Nathan Cross was drinking coffee when it happened. He had just sat down at his desk to review the morning data from Mars. The clock on the wall said 7:15. He clicked on the file showing the alien fleet's position. The screen was blank. Not black. Not showing static. Just blank, like the file was empty. Nathan thought his computer had crashed. He tried refreshing the page, nothing. He opened a different monitoring program. Also blank. He stood up and walked quickly to the main control room. Other scientists were already there, all looking confused and worried. Captain Lisa Morgan was shouting into her phone. She wanted to know if the tracking systems were broken. Someone on the other end was telling her the systems were fine. They were working perfectly. There just wasn't anything to track anymore. The alien ships were gone. Admiral Peter Hughes arrived 10 minutes later. He demanded an immediate report from every tracking station on Earth and in orbit. The answers came back one by one. China reported no alien contacts. Russia reported the same. Europe, India, Japan all said the same thing. The alien fleet had vanished, not flown away. Not jumped to light speed, vanished, there one moment, gone the next. No energy burst. No flash of light. No explosion. The sensors showed nothing at all. It was like the ships had never existed in the first place. Dr. Emma Blake ran simulations on her computer. She was looking for any explanation. Maybe the aliens had cloaked their ship somehow. She scanned for heat signatures, gravitational distortions, anything that would show invisible ships. There was nothing. If the aliens were still there, they were using technology that was completely invisible to every sensor humans had. Colonel Greg Foster ordered a full sweep of Mars and the surrounding space. Every telescope, every satellite, every piece of equipment was aimed at where the alien fleet had been. They took millions of pictures. They recorded every kind of radiation. The data all said the same thing. Empty space. Nothing there. The Mars rovers were still working on the surface of the planet. Carl Jensen was the engineer who controlled them from Earth. He drove the rovers to Olympus Mons, the place the alien signals had pointed to. The rovers had cameras and sensors. They searched the area for any sign that aliens had landed. Nothing. The Martian dust was undisturbed. No footprints. No equipment. No evidence anyone had been there at all. President Helen Clark called an emergency meeting. Every important person in government and military was there. The room was silent as Admiral Hughes explained what had happened. Or rather, what hadn't happened. The aliens came, they stayed for 9 days, and then they disappeared without a trace. No one knew where they went or why they left. Some people in the meeting suggested it was a good thing. The aliens left without attacking. Earth was safe. But others weren't so sure. What if the aliens were still watching somehow? What if they were preparing for a bigger attack? What if they went to get reinforcements? Commander Ryan Mitchell was looking out the window of the space station when the aliens vanished. 1 second he could see the faint dots of their ships near Mars. The next second they were gone. He blinked and rubbed his eyes. He thought maybe he was tired and seeing things. But his crew members saw it too. The aliens had simply winked out of existence. Ryan felt strange. He had been scared for 9 days straight. Now the threat was gone, but he didn't feel relief. He felt confused and somehow cheated. Humanity had prepared for first contact for decades. They had made plans for every scenario, war, peace, negotiation, trade, but nobody had made a plan for this. What do you do when aliens show up and then leave without saying anything? Down on Earth, the news spread fast. Within an hour, everyone knew the aliens were gone. The reactions were mixed. Some people celebrated in the streets. They danced and sang and thanked God. Others were suspicious. They didn't believe the aliens were really gone. They thought it was a government cover-up or a military trick. Kevin Torres sat at his news desk trying to report the story. But what was the story? Aliens came and left. That was it. There was no battle, no communication, no explanation. It was the biggest non-event in human history. Kevin interviewed dozens of experts. They all had theories but no answers. The truth was that nobody knew what had happened. Danny Price ran a popular blog about conspiracy theories. His website crashed from too many visitors. Everyone wanted to read his theory that the government had made up the whole alien thing. Danny wrote that the ships were really advanced drones created by a secret military program. He said world leaders wanted to unite humanity under one government, so they faked an alien invasion. His followers believed him. His critics called him crazy. Dr. Monica Wright was a psychologist who specialized in trauma. She appeared on several news shows to talk about how people were feeling. Monica explained that humans were dealing with a very strange kind of stress. They had prepared for the worst. Their bodies had been full of fear hormones for days. Then suddenly the threat disappeared. But the fear hormones don't just go away immediately. People were confused, angry, and emotionally exhausted. The Henderson family sat in their living room surrounded by boxes of canned food and bottles of water. They had spent hundreds of dollars preparing for the end of the world. Now what were they supposed to do with 50 cans of beans? Dan Henderson felt silly. He had been so scared. He had barely slept for a week. And now it was over just like that. No explanation. No closure. Just over. Julie Henderson was angry. She wanted answers. Why did the aliens come? What were they looking for? Did they find it? Will they come back? The not knowing was driving her crazy. At least if there had been a battle, she would understand. Battles made sense. This made no sense at all. Scientists around the world were frustrated too. Dr. Vincent Hayes spent 12 hours a day reviewing data. He was looking for anything he might have missed. Some tiny clue that would explain where the aliens went. His team checked and rechecked every calculation. They found nothing wrong. The data was good. The aliens had simply vanished in a way that broke every law of physics humans understood. Major Kyle Stevens was dismantling the emergency shelters his team had built. Thousands of cots, medical supplies, and food supplies had to be packed up and stored. Part of him was grateful they hadn't been needed. Part of him felt like all that work had been wasted. He tried to stay positive. Better to have shelters you don't need than to need shelters you don't have. Laura Bennett wrote her final intelligence report on the alien incident. She had to summarize 9 days of global panic in a document. How do you explain something that has no explanation? She wrote down the facts. Alien ships arrived. They went to Mars, they disappeared, the end. It felt wrong to leave it like that, but there was nothing else to say. As night fell, people looked up at the stars. Mars was visible, a small red dot in the sky. It looked peaceful and normal. It was hard to believe that just hours ago it had been surrounded by alien warships. The universe felt bigger now and lonelier. Humans had gotten their first real proof that they weren't alone, and then that proof had vanished, leaving only questions behind. President Helen Clark made a decision 3 weeks after the aliens disappeared. The world needed answers. Not knowing was tearing people apart. Some thought the aliens would come back. Others thought they had never existed. The uncertainty was creating fear and chaos. She announced the formation of a special investigation team. Their job was to figure out what happened. Dr. Nathan Cross was chosen to lead the investigation. He had been studying the aliens from the beginning. If anyone could solve the mystery, it was him. Nathan accepted the job even though he knew it might be impossible. How do you investigate something that left no evidence? The team gathered at a secure facility in California. Dr. Emma Blake came with her biological research. Dr. Alan Porter brought his physics knowledge. Stephanie Mills was an engineer who understood spacecraft systems. Colonel Greg Foster represented the military perspective. Dr. Lucas Martin was an anthropologist who studied how different cultures think and act. They started by building a timeline. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez coordinated with space agencies around the world. She collected data from every country that had been watching the aliens. The team had Russian satellite photos, Chinese sensor readings, European telescope data, and Indian probe information. Everyone had agreed to share everything because the mystery affected all of humanity. The timeline was very precise. The aliens entered the solar system at exactly 3:14 in the afternoon Greenwich Mean Time. They traveled for 72 hours on a direct course to Earth. Then they adjusted. Trajectory toward Mars. They spent 9 days in orbit around Mars, then, at 7:12 in the morning, they vanished. Total time in the solar system, 12 days, 15 hours, and 58 minutes. Dr. Vincent Hayes had been working on his own theory. He called it quantum displacement. His idea was that the aliens had technology that let them shift between dimensions. Maybe they slipped into a parallel universe where humans couldn't see them. He had complicated math to support his theory. The equations looked impressive on the whiteboard, but Dr. Emma Blake wasn't convinced. She pointed out that his theory couldn't be tested. There was no way to prove or disprove it. Vincent argued that just because humans couldn't test something didn't mean it wasn't real. The two scientists argued for hours while the rest of the team watched. Carl Jensen had a simpler explanation. He thought the aliens just had really good stealth technology. Maybe they could turn invisible in a way that blocked every type of sensor. Maybe they were still out there watching Earth and humans just couldn't see them anymore. It was creepy to think about, but it made more sense than other dimensions. Captain Lisa Morgan looked at the problem like a military strategist. She studied how the alien ships had moved and positioned themselves. There was something about their formation that bothered her. It wasn't a battle formation. Military ships don't arrange themselves in perfect circles. They spread out to cover more area and make themselves harder to hit. But the aliens had stayed in that precise circular pattern the whole time. She shared her observation with Dr. Lucas Martin. Lucas was fascinated. He explained that in human cultures, circles often represented completeness or ceremony. When ancient people did important rituals, they often formed circles. Maybe the aliens were doing something similar. Maybe their stay at Mars had been ceremonial somehow. This led to a new idea. What if the aliens weren't military at all? What if they were explorers or researchers? Lisa and Lucas worked together on this theory. They looked at everything the aliens had done through that lens. The careful approach to Mars, the scanning patterns, the precise positioning, the careful attention to one specific location. It all matched the behavior of scientists, not soldiers. Dr. Emma Blake joined their discussion. She had been saying from the beginning that the aliens might be looking for something on Mars. If Lisa and Lucas were right, then maybe the aliens had found what they were looking for. They completed their research and left. That would explain why they ignored Earth. Earth wasn't what they came for. Linda Morrison, the astronomer who first detected the aliens, was brought in to consult. She had been studying deep space for the past month. She had found something interesting. There were tiny distortions in background radiation along the path the alien fleet had taken when entering the solar system. The distortions were so small that she had almost missed them. Dr. Alan Porter examined her findings. He confirmed that the distortions were real. They looked like ripples in space itself, like the wake left by a boat in water. But space isn't supposed to work that way. Nothing humans knew about physics could create ripples like that, unless the aliens traveled using a method that literally bent space around them. More importantly, Linda found similar distortions leading away from Mars. The trail led out of the solar system in a different direction than the aliens had come from. So they had left. They weren't hiding in another dimension or using stealth technology. They had gone home or wherever they went next. The ripples in space proved it. The investigation team worked 12-hour days for 3 months. They analyzed every piece of data 100 times. They ran thousands of simulations. They consulted with experts in every field. Slowly, a picture began to form. It wasn't complete, but it was the best explanation they had. Nathan Cross wrote the final report himself. He spent a week writing and rewriting it. The report had to be clear enough for regular people to understand, but detailed enough to satisfy scientists. It had to present their conclusions without claiming certainty they didn't have. It was the hardest thing he had ever written. The key finding was simple. The aliens had come to Mars looking for something specific. They had found it or found evidence of it near Olympus Mons. Then they left. The signals they sent weren't battle commands or threats. They were more like survey notes or location markers, the kind of things archaeologists use when documenting a dig site. What were they looking for? The team couldn't say for sure. Maybe evidence of an ancient civilization that lived on Mars billions of years ago. Maybe geological samples. Maybe something humans didn't even have words for. The aliens' technology was so advanced that guessing their motives was like a dog trying to understand calculus. Why did they ignore Earth? This was the question that bothered people most. The team's answer was uncomfortable. Earth wasn't interesting to them. The aliens had assessed humanity and decided we weren't relevant to their mission. They probably knew humans were here. They probably could have communicated if they wanted to. They just didn't want to. Humans weren't important enough to bother with. Dr. Monica Wright warned that this conclusion would hurt people's feelings. Humans like to think they're important. Finding out that advanced aliens found us boring would be hard for many people to accept. But Nathan believed the truth was better than comfortable lies. People deserve to know what the investigation found. Commander Ryan Mitchell read an advance copy of the report. He had left the space station and returned to Earth. His hair had more gray in it now. The stress of those 9 days had aged him. He thought about what the report said. Humanity had prepared for war or peace. They had never prepared to be ignored, but Ryan saw something positive in the conclusion. The aliens had the power to destroy Earth. They didn't. Not because they were merciful, but because they simply didn't care. That was actually good news. It meant humanity was free. No alien overlords. No cosmic judgment, just indifference. Humanity could chart its own course without interference. The report was released to the public 6 months after the aliens vanished. It was front-page news everywhere. Some people were angry. How dare the aliens treat humanity like we don't matter? Others were relieved. At least the aliens weren't coming back to conquer Earth. Most people felt confused, which was understandable because the whole situation was confusing. Late at night, Nathan sat in his office and looked at the stars through his window. The investigation was over. The report was done. But he still had questions. Where did the aliens come from? What did they find on Mars? Would they ever come back? He would probably never know the answers. Sometimes mysteries stay mysteries. That was frustrating, but it was also humbling. The universe was bigger and stranger than humans could imagine. 5 years passed after the aliens vanished. The world had changed in ways both big and small. People still argued about what really happened. Some accepted the official report. Others created their own theories. But everyone agreed on one thing: humanity had gotten lucky. Very lucky. Dr. Nathan Cross retired from active research. He spent his days teaching at a university. His students always asked about the aliens. Nathan told them the same thing every time: the universe is full of mysteries. Some get solved, others don't. The important thing is to keep looking, keep learning, keep trying to understand. But Nathan noticed something interesting in his students. The alien visit had changed how young people thought about space. Before the aliens, space exploration was something for governments and billionaires. Now everyone wanted to be part of it. Applications to aerospace programs had tripled. Kids who used to dream of being doctors or lawyers now dreamed of being astronauts or spacecraft engineers. The change wasn't just in schools. It was everywhere. Governments that had been cutting space budgets started increasing them. Private companies invested billions in new rocket technology. International cooperation on space projects reached levels never seen before. Old enemies worked together because they all wanted the same thing: to reach the stars before aliens came back. President Helen Clark gave a speech on the 5-year anniversary of First Contact. She talked about how that day had changed everything. Humanity had looked into the face of cosmic insignificance and decided to do something about it. The alien visit had been a wake-up call. We realized we were small and weak, so we chose to become bigger and stronger. The speech was popular, but not everyone agreed with the message. Some people thought humanity should be more careful. What if pushing into space attracted dangerous attention? What if the next aliens weren't as indifferent as the first ones? Maybe staying quiet and hidden was safer than announcing our presence to the galaxy. Dr. Emma Blake understood both sides. She now ran a research center dedicated to studying potential alien life. Her team worked on ways to communicate with aliens if they ever came back. They also worked on biosafety protocols in case aliens carried diseases. Emma believed preparation was better than fear. You can't hide from the universe, you can only try to be ready for it. Colonel Greg Foster had been promoted to general. He oversaw the new Space Defense Initiative. Humanity had built hundreds of weapon satellites in the past 5 years. They also had 3 ships capable of traveling to Mars in weeks instead of months. The ships weren't much compared to alien technology, but they were a huge improvement over what Earth had 5 years ago. Greg knew the new weapons probably wouldn't stop advanced aliens, but they might slow them down. They might buy time for evacuations or negotiations. And if nothing else, they meant humanity wouldn't face the next threat completely helpless. Greg had learned an important lesson. The worst feeling in the world is being unable to defend yourself. He was making sure humanity would never feel that helpless again. Captain Lisa Morgan had left the military. She wrote a book about her experiences during the alien crisis. The book became a bestseller. Lisa spent a year traveling and giving talks. Her message was simple but powerful. Fear is useful if it makes you prepare. Fear is destructive if it makes you freeze. Humanity had been afraid, but they hadn't frozen. They had responded. They had adapted. That was something to be proud of. Commander Ryan Mitchell worked for a private space company now. They were building the first permanent settlement on the moon. Ryan was going to be one of the first residents. He was 50 years old, too old for adventure according to some people, but Ryan disagreed. The alien visit had taught him that life was short and the universe was huge. He wanted to see as much of it as possible before his time ran out. His daughter was 15 now. She wanted to be an astronaut too. Ryan remembered watching her play with toys when she recorded that message from the space station. He thought he might never see her again. Now she was almost grown up, planning her own journey to the stars. The aliens had taken 9 days from his life that he would never forget. But they had also given his daughter a dream worth pursuing. Linda Morrison still worked at the observatory in Hawaii. She was famous now. People called her the woman who discovered the aliens. Linda didn't like the attention much. She was a scientist, not a celebrity. But she used her fame to promote astronomy and space research. If her name could inspire kids to study science, then the fame was worth it. She still watched the stars every night. She was looking for more signs of alien activity. Maybe the visitors would come back someday. Maybe different aliens would come. Or maybe humanity would find them first. Linda had her telescopes pointed at nearby star systems now. If anyone was out there, she wanted to know. Carl Jensen was on Mars. He wasn't just controlling rovers anymore. He was actually there, living in the first human research base near Olympus Mons. The base had been built right where the aliens had shown interest. Carl and his team were looking for whatever the aliens had found. So far, they had discovered evidence that Mars once had liquid water. They found ancient minerals that only form in the presence of life. Nothing definitive yet, but they were getting closer. Sometimes Carl thought about the aliens standing right where he was standing now. Well, hovering above where he was standing, what had they seen that humans were still missing? The answer was probably in the rocks somewhere. Carl was patient. Mysteries take time to solve. He had his whole life to figure it out. Dr. Monica Wright wrote a book too. Hers was about the psychological impact of first contact. She interviewed hundreds of people about how the alien visit affected them. Some people had nightmares for months. Others felt depressed. A few had mental breakdowns, but most people recovered. Humans are good at adapting to new realities, even really strange ones. The most interesting finding in her research was about children. Kids who were very young during the alien visit didn't remember being scared. They just remembered it being exciting. To them, aliens were normal. This generation would grow up thinking of space as a place full of other civilizations. They wouldn't be shocked by alien life. They would expect it. Monica thought that was healthy. The universe is full of life. It was time humans got used to that idea. Kevin Torres was still a news anchor. He had covered the alien story from beginning to end. Now he covered the space program developments that came after. There was always something new. A new rocket launch, a new discovery on Mars, a new international space agreement. Kevin liked these stories better than the alien crisis. These stories were about hope instead of fear. The Henderson family never threw away their emergency supplies. The canned food and bottled water stayed in their basement. Dan said it was just being practical. You never know when you might need emergency supplies. But Julie knew the real reason. Those boxes made Dan feel safe. They were a reminder that even when something terrible is coming, you can prepare. You can do something. You don't have to just wait and be afraid. Their kids were older now. They asked questions about the aliens sometimes. What did they look like? Why did they leave? Will they come back? Dan and Julie gave honest answers. We don't know. Nobody knows. But humanity is getting ready just in case. The kids seemed satisfied with that. They went back to their homework and video games. Life went on. 10 years after the aliens vanished, humanity built its first ship capable of traveling to other star systems. It would take decades to reach even the nearest stars, but it was a start. The ship was called Hope. It carried a crew of 50 people and a message for any aliens it might meet. The message explained who humans were and where they came from. It invited peaceful contact. It offered friendship. Dr. Nathan Cross attended the launch. He was 70 years old now. He had spent his whole life hoping to find aliens. He had found them, sort of, for 9 days. That was more than most people got. He watched the ship leave Earth and felt proud. Humanity had been beneath notice. They had chosen to rise. Now they were reaching out to the stars with hope instead of fear. Years later, a monument was built at Olympus Mons on Mars. The human settlement there had grown to 500 people. They decided to mark the spot where the aliens had shown interest. The monument was simple, a metal pillar with words carved on it. The words were written by Jennifer Cole, a poet who lived on Mars. She had been only 10 years old when the aliens came. Now she was an adult, living on another planet writing about humanity's future. The inscription read, "We were beneath notice. We chose to rise." People came from all over Mars to see the monument. Some came from Earth, too. They stood there and thought about what the words meant. Humanity had been lucky. The aliens hadn't cared enough to destroy them. That luck gave humanity a chance to grow, a chance to learn, a chance to become something worth noticing. The universe was big. Humanity was small. But small things can grow. That was the real lesson of the 9 days. Not that aliens exist. Everyone knew that now. The lesson was that humanity could choose its own destiny. They could hide in fear, or they could reach for the stars. They chose the stars. Somewhere out, in space, the aliens who had come and gone were doing whatever aliens do. They probably never thought about Earth again. They had found what they needed on